Once upon a time there was a mischievous sprite who made a mirror with the power of causing everything reflected in it to look mean and ugly. In this mirror the most beautiful landscapes looked like boiled spinach, and the best persons were turned into terrors. The sprite wanted to hold the mirror up to heaven and earth to show how they really looked, but the higher he flew, the sprite could barely manage to hold it. It fell to the earth and shattered into hundreds of millions of billions of bits. Some of these pieces were smaller than a grain of sand which flew through the world. They stayed in people's eyes and distorted what they saw until all they saw was bad. A few people even got a glass splinter in their hearts, and that was a terrible thing, for it turned their hearts into lumps of ice. Above the roofs of the large town there lived two little children. They were not brother and sister, but they cared for each other as much as if they were. Their houses were exactly opposite, with a garden shared between them, where the children planted vegetables and little rose bushes. His name was Kay, hers was Gerda. One day there was quite a snowstorm, and the children gathered around the warm fire with Kay's grandmother for a story. She pointed to the snow. The white bees were swarming, and of all the bees there was a queen. The Snow Queen was the biggest bee of all and caused everything to freeze over. And then the grandmother patted their heads and told other stories. One day the children were tending to their garden when suddenly Kay felt sharp pains in his heart and more pain in his eye. He rubbed his eye and tried to get it out, but little known to the children, it was one of those magic shards of glass from the sprite's broken mirror. Now all Kay could see of the once beautiful roses and his friend Gerda was ugliness. Kay locked himself away in his room and isolated to his studies. A little while later, Kay went out to play with some of the boys in the square. The boys used to tie their sledges to carts as they passed by to be pulled along. Kay tied his sledge to a big white farmer's cart, and so they went, faster and faster. Each time the cart got a little quicker, Kay tried to free himself, but before he knew it, they were beyond the gates of the town. All of a sudden the snow parted, and Kay could see that the driver was the Snow Queen herself. After a long, cold winter of not knowing where Kay was, at last spring came with its warmer sunshine. Worried for Kay, Gerda asked the sunshine and the swallows if he was gone forever. "That I don't believe," said the sunshine and the swallows. Now determined to find Kay, Gerda set out into the unknown. Gerda came to a river and asked it if it knew where Kay was, and decided to give her favourite red shoes as a gift. She clambered into a boat which lay among the rushes and threw out her shoes. But before she knew it, the boat swept out into the waters and she found herself being carried away. She sailed by a cherry orchard and by a little thatched cottage by which two wooden soldiers stood to attention and presented arms when anyone went past. Gerda called out and an old woman came out of the cottage. The woman called Gerda in from the river, welcoming her into the cottage and its gardens. The old woman gave Gerda fruits from the garden and combed Gerda's hair while she told the story of her adventure and quest to find Kay. Knowing Gerda's story, the old lady hid the rose bushes away, and in time the child forgot her Kay, for the old lady practiced witchcraft and very much wanted little Gerda to stay. Then one morning Gerda went out to play with the flowers. She came across the roses that had been hidden away and kissed them. She reminisced of her own dear roses at home, and with that her memories of Kay returned. Gerda ran to the garden gate and beyond into the outside world. After she could run no further, she sat to rest. She looked up and realised that summer had gone by. She could never have guessed from within the garden, with the sun shining and the flowers in constant bloom, just how much time had passed. For all the lost time, Gerda was even more determined to travel on and find her lost friend Kay. When Gerda came to rest for a time, a large crow came hopping over the white snow. She told the crow her whole life story and asked if he hadn't seen Kay. The crow told of a kingdom where a princess so extraordinarily clever had taken a young man as her husband who sounded to be a lot like Kay. That night, Gerda and the crow flew to the castle. At the palace, Gerda crept along a little back stair and into a great bedchamber. She called out Kay's name, waking the prince and princess, who asked what the matter was. After hearing her story and wanting to help, they gave Gerda a little carriage with a horse in front and a small pair of shoes to go forth again in the wide world and look for Kay. As they drove through the dark wood, the bright carriage caught the eyes of robbers, who forced the carriage to stop and pulled little Gerda out. One little robber girl wanted to play with Gerda and thought she may be a princess, to which Gerda said no and told the story of all that had happened to her. The robbers decided to take Gerda onto their castle, where ravens and crows flew out of the open holes, and huge fierce dogs looked as if they could swallow a whole human being. Gerda slept among the robber girl's animals. There were wood pigeons sat above them on lathes and perches, and tied up was a reindeer called Back, who had a bright copper ring around its neck. Late at night, whilst the robbers slept, the wood pigeons spoke softly to Gerda, telling her that they had seen little Kay. He was with the Snow Queen. Little Gerda cried and asked where the Snow Queen had gone. Reindeer said that she was headed to Lapland, but her real palace was near the North Pole. Gerda sighed at the thought of poor little Kay. In the morning, Gerda told the little robber girl of all that the wood pigeons had said. The little robber girl looked very serious and decided to release the reindeer, saying that he may go home, but must take Gerda to the palace of the Snow Queen. Joyously, Gerda and the reindeer shot off over shrubs and tree stumps through the great forest as fast as they could. Looking at the sky as they ran, they saw the northern lights. Oh, how they gleamed! They shot off even faster, night and day, not stopping until they were in Lapland. After many miles, Gerda and the reindeer came by a little house. At home was an old woman cooking fish, where they decided to stop and share Gerda's story. After learning of poor Kay, the woman told Gerda of how little Kay found everything there with the Snow Queen perfect, and believed it the best place in the world. But that was because he had glass in his heart and eye. Desperate to help Gerda, the reindeer asked the woman if she could give Gerda special strength over everything. Alas, it was Gerda's task alone to help little Kay, for the woman could give no more power than what she already had. Men and animals serve her, and she had come so far in the world on her own bare feet. But Gerda must not be told of her power, for it lies in her sweet and innocent heart. Gerda and the reindeer set off and ran as fast as they could until they came to a bush with red berries, for there the garden of the Snow Queen began. The reindeer set Gerda down and kissed her goodbye. Large glistening tears ran down his cheeks before he ran back as swiftly as he could. Gerda went forth into the cold alone, with only the thought of Kay driving her. At last she came to the palace. The empty, endless halls of the palace, each many miles long, little Kay sat, quite blue with cold. But he didn't know it. He spent his days arranging ice pieces into all sorts of shapes, which seemed to him, with the grain of glass in his eye, to be a great and important work. Gerda stepped through into the great cold palace and beheld Kay. She flew to embrace him and cried out Kay's name in joy. But he sat quite still and cold, for he didn't recognise his friend. Little Gerda shed burning tears that fell onto Kay, penetrating his heart and thawing the lumps of ice. He looked at her and she sang the hymns that she used to. Kay burst into tears. He wept so much that the splinter rolled out of his eye, and he recognised her. Gerda, sweet Gerda. And he held fast by Gerda, who laughed and wept for joy. And Kay and Gerda looked into each other's eyes, took each other's hands and left the palace to start their return journey home. Wherever they walked, the winds died down and the sun came out. First, small birds started to chirp and the forest had light green buds. Their journey saw them meet all the friends that Gerda had made during her quest, each meeting them with great happiness. Kay and Gerda walked hand in hand, and as they walked along it was a wonderful spring with flowers and greenness everywhere. The church bells rang and they knew they had reached their home. They went into the grandmother's house where everything stood just as before, but they noticed that they were no longer children. The roses bloomed through the open windows, and as they were there, hand in hand, they came to forget the cold, empty magnificence of the Snow Queen's palace. There they sat, two grown-ups and yet children, children at heart, and it was summer, warm, wonderful summer.